When a judge sentences a person to prison, he frequently will also impose either a fine, a restitution order, or a forfeiture order. And it's important for you to know how the Bureau of Prisons is going to respond to those fines and restitution orders or forfeiture orders. And the more you prepare early on, the better off you are going to be. It's one of the reasons I really encourage you to go through all of the lessons at Prison Professors and also use our AI tool. So it's available at the lower right corner of every page where you could just ask questions. What if I get a fine in federal prison? What if my judge imposes a restitution order? What's going to happen? The more you know about that and the earlier you know about it, the more effective you might be at building a pathway that will help you ease your time in prison, avoid complications, and hopefully build a pathway that will accelerate your time home. So in the AI section of our site, we provide a lot of authority on this. But in the lesson that accompanies this video, I will also include a PDF with that authority that kind of explains it. But I'm just going to give you like a rundown on it historically and why it applies to you. And it applies to you based on the time that you have been sentenced. So I was sentenced, or I was arrested in 1987, and there was a different sentencing law at that time. At that time, and my judge not only gave me a 45-year sentence, he also imposed a $500,000 fine. And that $500,000 fine accumulated interest. So by the time I got to the end of my prison term, that fine had grown to more than $2 million. And I can tell you it would have been much more difficult for me to build my career when I got out of prison if I had that $500,000 obligation hanging over my head. But I didn't, because at the time that I was sentenced, the law held that the government only had 20 years to collect on a debt. So I got sentenced, I think it was in 1988, which means in 2008, my fine expired and the government could no longer collect on that debt, which really made things a lot easier for me when I came home. Unfortunately, the law changed. And I think that law changed in 1994. I'm not quite certain of the time, but I'm filming this video in August, September of 2025. And this is the law of the land right now. If the judge imposes a fine or a restitution order on you, the government will still have 20 years to collect on that debt. However, if the court imposes a term of imprisonment, then the 20 years doesn't begin to toll or start ticking until after you finish your obligation to the Bureau of Prisons. And as I said, the lesson that accompanies this video will provide the authority on that. But you should know, how does this really get carried out inside of the Bureau of Prisons? So there is always an authority level. It's one of the reasons I encourage you to take some time to read Title 28 of the Code of Federal Regulations, starting around Section 500. I used to read that section every couple of years so that I would at least be fluent in the rules of the Bureau of Prisons, but also know how could I maneuver my way to get the best possible result. I really discourage you from hiring a prison consultant. A lot of those people only had served a year in prison and in a single institution, and they didn't really do anything while they were inside, many of them, to really differentiate themselves and demonstrate that they have true mastery. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, and a lot of them are really, marketing themselves as experts, but when in reality, the only thing they're an expert at is fleecing people who are vulnerable out of money. You can get everything for free at prisonprofessors.org. Use our AI tool and ask your questions, or just read all of the lessons, and you'll become more fluent. You will know where to go to get authoritative information. And I'm just going to give you that information right now. So in the Bureau of Prisons, there is a program called the Financial Responsibility Program, or it's technically called the IFRP, the Inmate Financial Responsibility Program. I just don't like to use the word inmate, but the program is governed by what you'll find in Title 28 C.F.R. And I'm just going to read it to you. I opened it up on my screen. It says, the Bureau of Prisons encourages each sentenced inmate to meet his or her legitimate financial obligations. As part of the initial classification process, staff shall assist the inmate in developing a financial plan and shall monitor the inmate's progress in meeting that obligation. Again, that's Title 28 C.F.R. Section 545.1. Section 545.11 says, when an inmate has a financial obligation, unit staff shall means they must do it, shall help the inmate develop a financial plan. The inmate is responsible for making satisfactory progress. Ordinarily, the minimum payment for non-UNICOR inmates, UNICOR is the factory in prison that pays just a little bit more, the wages are, will be $25 per quarter. UNICOR inmates, grade 1 through 4, ordinarily will pay not less than 50% of their monthly pay, okay? Now, refusal consequences include commissary spending limits, ineligibility for community programs, furloughs, RDAP, early release, UNICOR work, and many other incentives, including the federal time credits if you're eligible for First Step Back credits. So this is really important because it's not only going to be the money that you earn in prison, but if your family sends you money while you're in prison or friends receive your money, all of that is going to be considered fair game by administrators in the Bureau of Prisons. So if you have a fine of, say, $500,000 like I had, or a restitution order of a few $100,000 or a few $1 million, the BOP is going to look at your income over the past in between team meetings, okay? So you typically have a team meeting every, it's depending on how much time you have, but it's either every 12 months, 6 months, or 3 months. And those team meetings, your staff is going to, before they have the team meeting, they're just going to get an accounting, a summary of how much money has come through your account. And it's not only going to be your prison earnings. So if you're getting $500 a month in prison, you might expect that the system will tell you to sign this financial responsibility plan and take 50% or more of all the money you receive. So it can complicate things while you're in prison. And there are steps that you should take before sentencing to try and mitigate that by perhaps asking the judge if he will make an order in the statement of reasons or in the judgment and commitment that if he imposes a fine, that the fine will not be collectible until after you finish your obligation with the Bureau of Prisons. Now, the upside of that is it makes it a little bit easier while you're in prison to comply with the programs, but not have the money that you need to buy food and clothing and so on like that get taken. Because if you have a fine of $500,000, I mean, let's be realistic. It's going to be very difficult to satisfy that fine while you're in prison. So you have the obligation hanging over you. What I would recommend that you do is you really memorialize and build a pathway to success, and position yourself to request a reassessment when you get out of prison. It's not easy. But I'm also going to say it's not possible. And I always believe that if there's a better than 0% chance of success, you've got to pursue it. And there's a better than 0% chance of success in persuading the judge to issue your fine starting once you get out of prison. And one of the ways that you should probably do that is before you get sentenced, start building a pathway of payment. Give it to your attorney and ask him to put it into your trust fund, set it aside, include it in your allocution, demonstrate that you are serious about your financial responsibilities. But while you're in prison, you may want to ask your defense attorney to explain why it would be better if they postponed the fine until after you get out of prison, because you really don't want bureaucrats interfering with your ability to just buy telephone minutes to speak with your family, or email credits so that you can speak with your family. So it's important to understand the nuances of the financial responsibility program and understand steps that you could take once at sentencing to try and minimize the harm. Now, you do have to comply, because if you don't comply, as I said, they are going to make your life, the system will make your life more difficult while you're in prison. They could give you lack of commissary. You'll definitely lose your time credits, okay, and preferred housing and all kinds of complications that you just don't want to have. So try and understand the FRP program before you go to prison. Now, with regard to the duration of how long this is going to stay hanging over your head, here's the statutory authority for the law as it exists today in September of 2025. Title 18 U.S.C. Section 3613 B and C. Here, I'm just going to read it to you. The liability to pay a fine shall terminate in the later of 20 years from the entry of judgment or 20 years after the release from imprisonment of the person fined. Okay? In the case of a restitution order, the liability shall terminate on the latter of 20 years from the entry of judgment or 20 years after the release from imprisonment. So you can expect a financial sanction to hang over your head for 20 years after you get out of prison, which is all the more reason that I encourage you, memorialize your journey in prison. Demonstrate all of the efforts that you have made to prepare yourself to reconcile with society, to be a law-abiding citizen, because all of that becomes an asset for you in your self-advocacy. I use that. And as I say in all of our videos, I never ask anyone to do anything I didn't do. I'm never going to lie to you, and I'm never going to ask anybody to pay me a penny. You can get all this information for free at prisonprofessors.org. You do not need to hire a prison consultant or somebody who fancies himself as an expert, but lacks the true authority and knowledge of how to maneuver and navigate your journey through prison in the most successful way possible. I know that some people don't only want to read, they do want to talk to people. I'm not available for those types of consultations because I'm focused on changing the system and building more pathways to success for people in prison. But I do recommend Justin Paperny. He is a sponsor of our nonprofit, and he hosts a webinar every week at whitecollaradvice.com/nonprofit. You be cool.